In 1000, Norsemen reached Newfoundland. In 1492, Columbus crossed the Atlantic. In 1507, a map named America, yet left its center blank. Coins appear where they shouldn't. Amphorae surface in Brazil. Who arrived first, or whose voyages were erased from the ledgers and the sea both? A silver coin in soil, a terracotta head in a grave, a vellum chart patched with new coastlines. Between 1000 and 1616, Norse sagas, Iberian logs, and Polynesian crops hint at crossings. Proofs scatter in shards, threads, and words washed thin. If maps remember, what journeys still refuse to be named? Welcome to History's Ledger. This isn't the classroom debate over who was first. It's a walk through a museum of misplaced artifacts, objects that whisper of crossings the ledgers did not keep. We begin with what survived: Norse timber and ironwork at Lance, Meadows, a Norwegian coin said to surface in Maine, Roman-style jars off Guanabara Bay, a terracotta head placed in a pre-Columbian grave, Chinese porcelain with no voyage attached, Polynesian crops that speak Quechua across an ocean. Some of these finds are legitimate, others are disputed, and a few may be wrong. But together they form a problem the archives cannot ignore. Our question is not who discovered America. It's how many discoveries were made and erased before the record settled on a single story. We'll handle each clue with care, mark what's proven, and keep what's possible where it belongs, in the space between fragment and file. Expect luxury traces, a coin face worn smooth, green glass, porcelain lip, vellum patches, not as spectacle, but as contrast. Expect silences, sagas cut mid-line, letters in disputed hands, ship logs that never existed, not as certainty, but as caution. If an object can cross an ocean and outlast its ledger, what else have we forgotten to look for? The axe marks were still visible when the soil gave them up. In the northern wind of Newfoundland, at the place later named Lance, Meadows, archaeologists uncovered timbers that had been shaped by hands carrying iron blades. The cuts were neat, purposeful, unmistakable. Local peoples carved wood with stone. These edges came from metal. At first, it could have been guesswork. Maybe a stray traveler, maybe a fragment carried across the ocean centuries later. But the wood carried its own clock. In the rings, beneath its bark, was a global scar, the trace of a massive solar storm that bathed the planet in radiation in the year 993. Every tree alive at the time recorded it. The timbers cut at Lance Meadows bore that mark, with exactly 28 growth rings above it. The trees had been felled in 1021, not legend, not rumor, a date tied to the sky itself. This is the first moment America is entered into the ledger of history by Europeans, not through a diary or a saga, but through a scar written in oak. No chronicler can overrule a tree, Around those timbers were other pieces of evidence. The remains of sod houses, low walls covered in grass, a spindle whorl, proof that women had made the crossing too. Charcoal from a forge where bog iron was smelted, and slag still dark as if it had cooled yesterday. A small bronze pin that once fastened a cloak against the wind. And then the strangest find, butternut shells. They don't grow in Newfoundland. Their habitat is far to the south, in regions around the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Someone from that settlement had traveled there, carried them back, cracked them open by a northern fire. That single nut speaks more than a saga could. The Norse went farther than the ruins show. They explored past their homes into forests unknown, and then they returned with what they found. The sagas remembered these journeys in fragments. They called the place Vinland, the land of grapes, though no vines grew on that coast. Maybe they mistook berries for grapes. Maybe they remembered places farther south. The texts, when read now, are uneven, patched, almost weary. They describe encounters with people already living there, meetings that began with trade but ended with hostility, a clash over timber, a skirmish over weapons, a sudden death at the edge of camp. Then, the stories trail into silence. Imagine the sound of that silence. Houses abandoned before their roofs collapsed, tools left, not lost. Families leaving before the ground froze too hard to dig. They sailed east, back to Greenland and Iceland, leaving no written record, only these fragments. Why did they not stay? Perhaps they were too few in number. Perhaps the distance to resupply was too great. Perhaps resistance from those who already called the place home was stronger than they expected. Or perhaps the Norse simply never intended permanence. We cannot know their thoughts, but we know the mark of their work. One man, in the autumn of 1021, lifted his axe and brought it down against a tree. The cut he made has survived 1,000 years. It survived the failure of his colony, the fading of the sagas, the absence of written proof. It survived the centuries in which Columbus became the only name schoolchildren knew. It tells us the Norse were here, that their voyages reached farther than legend dared, that the story of America was already underway before 1492, and it leaves a different kind of tension. If these journeys were real, and they were, why did their records vanish from the European narrative? Who decided not to remember them? The sagas stopped mid-line. The settlements fell quiet. The axes rusted, their wood rotted. But the trees, patient and unyielding, kept their secret until we learned to ask the right question. The next clue is smaller than a thumb, a single coin, worn smooth on one side, its faint markings traced in a style far from American soil. In 1957, on a site in Maine known as Goddard's Point, amateur archaeologists uncovered a scatter of artifacts, stone tools, ceramics, fragments from centuries of indigenous trade. Among them, in the soil of an old camp, lay a silver coin minted in Norway sometime in the 11th century. The find made headlines. Was this proof, that Norse explorers had pushed deep into the continent, far south of Newfoundland, centuries before Columbus? The timing seemed possible. The coin itself was authentic. It bore the design of King Olaf Kyrre, who reigned from 1067 to 1093. That date aligns with the known Viking age of exploration, but the context was tangled. The coin was the only Norse object in the entire site. Everything else belonged to indigenous traditions: stone scrapers, pottery shards, tools that told the story of native lives carried out long before Europeans returned. No other trace of Norse settlement was there. Some scholars suggested trade, that the coin had traveled hand to hand across networks stretching thousands of miles. Others proposed it was a later intrusion, dropped into the soil centuries after the camp was abandoned. A few went further, arguing the find had been misinterpreted altogether, that it was out of place but not necessarily out of time. What is harder to explain is why only this coin surfaced, and why its journey, if it had one, was never written down. The Norse sagas mention voyages, yes, but no ledger records a payment in silver along the coast of Maine. No European ship's log places a landing there. No local oral tradition mentions an exchange. A single coin remains, authentic but orphaned. Objects like this are fragile witnesses. They outlast their owners, but without context, their testimony is incomplete. The penny tells us the Norse were present in some way, either directly or indirectly, but it refuses to say how. Was it carried south by a Norse explorer? Traded across a continent by indigenous hands? Or dropped centuries later by a collector who never imagined it would confuse the story so completely? No answer has been agreed on. The coin rests today in a museum, protected by glass, its surface dull with age. It survives as a question more than a fact. And in that silence, the absence of records, the missing map, the saga that never mentioned Maine, lies the tension of this entire history. The ledger is incomplete. The object remains. Divers knew something was unusual the moment they saw the shapes. Beneath the water of Guanabara Bay, near Rio de Janeiro, the seabed was scattered with ceramic jars. Long-necked, curved, their surfaces encrusted with barnacles and coral. They looked ancient, not colonial. The style matched the containers known across the Mediterranean world. Amphorae, used by Greeks and Romans to carry wine, oil, grain. The first fragments were noticed in the 1970s. Then more appeared in the years that followed. Shards from an estimated 200 jars. They had no stoppers, no inscriptions, no record of a voyage that could explain them. If authentic, their presence in Brazil would mean Roman vessels crossed the Atlantic more than 1,000 years before Columbus. Yet no Roman logbook describes such a crossing. No chronicler in Iberia or Italy ever recorded an expedition to the lands across the Western Sea. The ledgers are silent. How did the jars get here? One explanation is ballast. Merchant ships, heavy with cargo, often discarded empty amphorae at anchor. But what Mediterranean trader reached South America? Another theory suggests they were carried by later ships, dumped at sea by accident, and shifted west by ocean currents. But the concentration seems too dense for drift. Some say the fragments were planted, modern objects lowered into the bay to stir sensation. The chain of custody is messy. The evidence, like the water, is murky. Still, the amphorae endure. They sit in drawers, guarded in museums, their clay rough but unmistakably Roman in shape. Luxury once filled them, oil pressed in Iberian estates, wine drawn from amphitheaters, cargo meant for distant markets. Now their contents are gone. Only the vessels remain, mysterious in their new world resting place. Why no shipwreck? Why no inscription? Why nothing in the records? A single amphora could be dismissed, a stray object with an ordinary explanation. But 200? That number lingers. If Roman jars reached Brazil, what voyage carried them? And if that voyage happened, why was it erased? The question remains under the water, with the shards. A museum label may say, provenance uncertain, but the clay whispers something more, a story of oceans crossed, ledges lost, and fragile cargo that should not exist where it was found. In 1933, during excavations near Toluca, Mexico, archaeologists opened a burial mound from the pre-Columbian era. Among the offerings, obsidian blades, painted vessels, shells carried inland from the coast, was something that seemed entirely foreign. It was a small terracotta head, no larger than a fist. The features were not local. The nose, the beard, the proportions, all seemed more aligned with Mediterranean styles than with Mesoamerican art. Scholars who studied it compared the piece to Roman figurines of the 2nd century. How did such an object find its way into a grave, sealed long before Columbus? One possibility is intrusion, that the head fell into the mound after contact, disturbed by later digging. Another theory is fraud, a modern piece planted to create sensation. The excavation records, however, list the head alongside authentic artifacts, catalogued with care. The soil layer, according to reports, was undisturbed. The terracotta has been analyzed repeatedly. Its clay composition does not clearly link it to Europe, but its style resists easy classification in any known pre-Columbian tradition. It sits in the uneasy space between authenticity and anomaly. If genuine, the implications are unsettling. Did a Roman or Roman-inspired object cross the Atlantic centuries before Norse explorers and long before Columbus? Was it carried by trade, shipwreck, or a forgotten voyage never written down? And if it was not Roman, if it was created locally, why does it not resemble anything else produced in the region? The burial context deepens the puzzle. This was not a marketplace discard, not a casual token. It was placed carefully among the grave goods, as if meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Whoever left it there believed it carried meaning, even if we no longer understand what that meaning was. The head now rests in a museum case. Its surface is smooth, the glaze dulled by centuries underground. Visitors walk past quickly, glancing but rarely pausing. The label is cautious. Terracotta figurine. Provenance debated. That single word, debated, has followed the piece for nearly a century. Luxury is fragile. Clay can cross oceans in a single voyage and then endure millennia in the earth. What it cannot preserve is its story. The ledgers of Rome contain no mention of America. The chronicles of Mexico contain no mention of Rome. The grave alone holds the connection, and it is silent. A face with no name, a burial with no record, an object that should not exist where it was found. What voyage does this small head remember? What crossing is it the last survivor of? The answers remain buried, not in the soil, but in the silences of history. On a volcanic island in the Pacific, long before Europeans began crossing those waters, Polynesian farmers tended their gardens with a crop that seemed out of place. Thick-skinned, orange-fleshed, with leaves that stretched toward the sun, it was a plant that had no natural roots in the Pacific at all. The sweet potato, Ipomoea batatas, is native to South America. It grows in the Andes and along the western coasts, thriving in climates far from Polynesia. Yet, by the time Europeans first reached the Pacific Islands in the 1500s, the crop was already established. It wasn't just present, it was woven into diets, rituals, even vocabulary. The mystery is in the word. Across Polynesia, the name for the plant was kumara, or close to it. In the highlands of Peru and Ecuador, in Quechua and Aymara languages, the same crop was called kuma or kumal. The resemblance is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Plants do not carry words by ocean currents. How did it happen? One explanation is drift. Seeds or cuttings carried by birds or washed into the sea, drifting across thousands of miles before finding land. But sweet potatoes don't survive salt water for long. Another explanation is voyage. Polynesian navigators reaching the coasts of South America, bringing the crop back across the Pacific in their canoes. Polynesians were extraordinary sailors. They read waves like ledgers, the stars like maps. They reached nearly every habitable island across the world's largest ocean. To believe they could not cross to South America is harder than to believe they did. Archaeologists have found traces that suggest the connection was real. Carbon-dated remains of sweet potatoes in Polynesia predate European arrival by centuries. Genetic studies of the crop itself confirm the link. The varieties grown in Polynesia and South America share common ancestry. The plant tells its own story in DNA, even where ledgers are silent. Imagine the moment of exchange. A Polynesian canoe pulled up on a South American shore. A Quechua farmer holding a vine, handing it carefully to the visitors. No treaty, no inscription, just a gesture. Perhaps a word spoken once, half understood. Kumar. And the sailors repeated it, shaping it into their own tongue. Kumara. One anthropologist, studying oral traditions in Polynesia, noted fragments of voyages eastward, tales of islands seen where no islands exist, of lands where the sun felt different, of gifts exchanged and never forgotten. These are not precise records, but they echo the way memory survives when no ink is used. The sweet potato itself became the record. Every harvest, every meal, every repetition of the name was a quiet act of remembrance. The plant crossed oceans and kept both names alive. In a museum drawer, far from any field, lies a dried cutting of one of the earliest documented Polynesian sweet potatoes. Its surface is shriveled, the skin collapsed, but the label still reads Kumara. Visitors rarely notice it, yet that root carries more weight than any explorer's journal. It is proof that contact was made, even if the details are lost. A Pacific elder once explained to a visiting scholar softly, "The plant remembers where the paper does not." That sentence holds the tension. We have no European chart that describes a Polynesian landing on South American shores. No South American ledger that records visitors from the West. What we have is a crop, a word, and a silence. And sometimes, silence speaks more than archives. The sweet potato remains, alive in two worlds, a bridge of roots that still whispers of a voyage never written down. In a small storeroom of a coastal museum, porcelain lies broken into neat trays. Smooth fragments, blue against white, the glaze still catching light centuries after the vessels themselves shattered. These pieces were pulled from American soil and seabeds, far from the kilns of China where they were made. They were meant for courts and merchants, luxury households that demanded bowls thin as eggshell, cups painted with cobalt cranes. Yet here they rest, scattered across landscapes where no official record says they should be. The first shards were uncovered in the heat of excavation, the sun pressing down on the dig. Dust clung to the gloves of those lifting the fragments, their edges still sharp after centuries underground. When washed, the glaze gleamed as if the potter's wheel had just stopped spinning. Silence surrounds their story. No logbook describes a shipment of porcelain reaching these shores before the galleons of the 1500s. No manifest lists such fragile cargo making its way into the Americas earlier. And yet the objects are here, not imagined, not disputed, but tangible in the hand. The smell of iron haunts many of the sites where shards are found. Rusted nails, anchors, cannon fragments. The remains of ships long since collapsed. Some believe the porcelain is later carried in the holds of Spanish vessels, then lost to storms or wreckage. But in some cases, the dating is less clear. Were earlier voyages possible? If so, why were they left unrecorded? One site revealed more than broken bowls. Nearby lay a scatter of bones, too weathered to identify easily, but human. The sight of them alongside porcelain sharpened the mystery. Who carried these vessels? What coast were they meant for? Why was the voyage never entered into the ledger? Standing in front of the drawers of porcelain, you notice how ordinary they look. Chips, slivers, a rim here, a painted line there. Without context, they could be fragments from any dinner table. But these pieces crossed oceans, survived wrecks, and outlasted the archives that should have explained them. Touch, smell, sight, all confirm their reality. What they cannot provide is a story, and so the porcelain joins the ledger of anomalies, a luxury object found where the record is blank. Heat, dust, silence, iron, bone, 5 senses of absence, bound to an object that should not exist where it does. In the hills of West Virginia, stone pillars rise where the forest thins. Their surfaces are lined with cuts, not random scratches, but deliberate markings. Long lines, short strokes, angled clusters. Some researchers claim these are Ogham, an early Irish script used between the 4th and 7th centuries. If true, it would mean a European hand-carved letters into American rock 1,000 years before Columbus. The first reports came in the 19th century. Travelers noticed the markings and argued over their meaning. Were they tally marks, native carvings, or something far older, brought across the Atlantic by monks or wanderers? The suggestion tied itself to legend. The voyage of St. Brendan, the Irish monk said to have sailed westward with companions in search of paradise. His story was half miracle, half travelogue, describing crystal pillars in the sea, perhaps icebergs, and volcanic islands that spewed fire. The carvings gave the legend a foothold in stone. But are they truly Ogham? Standing before them, you feel the heat pressing down through the trees. Dust gathers in the cracks of the rock, filling the grooves where blades once cut. When the wind drops, the silence is absolute, broken only by the sound of your own breathing. The lines themselves are not deep. You run a hand across them and feel only shallow impressions, softened by centuries of weather. To some, they read as letters, a sequence that could be translated into names or words. To others, they are wishful thinking, natural cracks mistaken for script, or colonial-era doodles mistaken for ancient proof. What unsettles the debate is context. Around the stones, no Irish artifacts have been found. No tools, no pottery, no remnants of a settlement. Just the carvings, alone, unsupported. If monks did carve them, why leave nothing else? If others followed, why no bones, no iron, no ledger? And yet, the marks endure. They invite questions the records cannot answer. Was St. Brendan's voyage only story? Or did some reach further than anyone now admits? Could Irish seafarers, with their hide-covered boats, have crossed the Atlantic on winds that would later carry Vikings and Spaniards? One historian, after tracing the carvings with chalk, said quietly to a colleague, "If this is writing, it's writing meant to be forgotten." That sentence lingers. Why carve in stone if not to be remembered? Why mark letters at all if no one remained to read them? The smell of iron comes faintly from nearby rails, modern intrusions, reminders of how easily marks blur across centuries. But the stones themselves resist dismissal. They do not prove a voyage. but they refuse to vanish into nothing. What remains is tension, a script without a scribe, a story without a ledger, a silence deeper than the carvings themselves. Were these strokes the memory of a monk's passage, or the accident of stone split by time? Were they the beginning of a lost record, or only the human need to find meaning where there may be none? The questions hang in the forest, unanswered, and the carvings, shallow but insistent, wait for someone to decide whether they are proof or only shadows of proof. When Columbus returned from his third voyage, he carried more than charts and notes. He carried a rumor. He reported to the Spanish crown that off the coast of West Africa, canoes had been seen, large, sturdy, loaded with goods, setting out westward toward open water. Not fishing boats, not short-range craft, but vessels prepared for distance. The story reached him through Portuguese sailors who claimed they had watched the departures themselves. If true, where were those canoes headed? The Atlantic between West Africa and Brazil is not as wide as it looks on a globe. At its narrowest, less than 3,000 kilometers, the trade winds blow westward, steady and predictable. The same currents later used by Europeans in the Age of Empire. A crossing was possible, even efficient. Archaeological silence follows the story. No African shipwrecks on American shores, no preserved journals, no confirmed artifacts. And yet, the suggestion persists, echoed by another anomaly. The colossal heads of the Olmec civilization in Mexico, carved centuries before Columbus. Some faces bear features that early European observers described as African. The claim is debated, often dismissed, as interpretation shaped by bias. But the stones exist. Their weight refuses to be ignored. Imagine the heat of that departure, the dust of the African coast lifting in the wind as men loaded goods into canoes, their bows pointed west. The silence after they left the horizon, the smell of salt and iron as anchors and tools were lifted for the last time. If they reached the Americas, why was no memory kept? Did they arrive and blend into the lives of those already there? Did storms carry them under? Or were their names simply erased when later arrivals wrote their own ledgers? The bones of such travelers, if they lie anywhere, are unmarked. None have been claimed as proof, but the possibility haunts the record. Columbus believed the rumor enough to chase it, and in chasing it, he stumbled onto the coast of South America. The story loops back on itself, canoes that may have crossed an ocean, a rumor that inspired another voyage, a discovery that overwrote the rumor itself. One chronicler recorded the words of a sailor who claimed to have watched those departures. They did not look back. A phrase like that, carried through centuries, leaves more questions than answers. Were they merchants seeking new lands? Refugees from drought or conflict? Adventurers in search of something unnamed? And if they reached the Americas, what did they leave behind? The silence is louder than the evidence. No ledger lists their arrival. No archive marks their passing. only Columbus's note, a handful of carved heads, and the endless trade winds still blowing west. The canoes are gone. The ocean remembers nothing, but the rumor remains, like a line erased from the ledger, still visible if you know how to hold the page to the light. The story begins with a storm. In the mid-1600s, a rice transport ship left Japan. Its mast snapped, its rudder was torn away, and the vessel was pushed helplessly into the Pacific. There was no way to steer, no way to turn back. For more than a year, the currents carried it east, across thousands of miles. When the wreck finally reached the coast of what is now Washington State, only 3 men were still alive. This was not the only time. Records in Japan describe dozens of such incidents. Boats swept from their islands, carried by the Kuroshio current across the ocean. Some landed in the Americas, some never returned. Imagine the feeling on those boats. The heat of the sun pressing down without relief. The dust of salt coating skin. Silence between men too weak to speak. The smell of iron nails rusting in seawater. Boards groaning, ropes fraying. And in the end, the sight of bones. Crew members who could not endure. Buried at sea, or left where they fell. The records that survive in Japan do not describe what happened to those who landed. Did they make contact with indigenous communities on the American coast? Did they die before they could explain who they were or where they had come from? The ledgers in both worlds are blank. Then there are the Polynesians, sailors whose voyages were not accidents. They read waves like text, winds like compass lines, stars like maps. Their canoes were built for intention, not drift. They reached nearly every habitable island in the Pacific, long before Europeans arrived. Some scholars now argue they reached the Americas too, centuries before Columbus. The grief is in what we've lost. Oral traditions survive only in fragments. Crops like the sweet potato speak for them when words are gone. But the regret is sharper still. No one wrote their names. No chronicles mark their crossings. No ledger records the moment when a canoe pulled up on a foreign shore, or when its sailors offered a gift, or when they left again. Collapse doesn't always look like fire or conquest. Sometimes it looks like silence, when the sea buries more than it gives back. The bones of sailors carried east by storms. The forgotten names of navigators who crossed with skill, the ships that never returned, and the stories that never made it home. What remains are fragments, a tale of 3 Japanese men stepping off a wreck on an unfamiliar shore, a Polynesian word that matches the South American one, currents that still move in the same rhythm, east to west, west to east. History asks for proof. The ocean offers grief. And somewhere between the two, the record collapses into silence. Amerigo Vespucci's name lingers on every globe, but the paper it rests on is uncertain. In the early 1500s, letters circulated in Europe claiming Vespucci had reached the New World before Columbus. They described coasts, rivers, stars. voyages that seemed almost too precise. Printers copied them, maps were patched with new outlines, and one cartographer, looking for a name to fix on this new land, chose America. Yet, many of those letters are now considered forgeries. Their handwriting is suspect, their dates inconsistent, their accounts overlapping in ways no real voyage could. Some scholars believe Vespucci wrote only fragments, and the rest was stitched together by others. Publishers eager for fame, investors eager for stories. Still, the impact was real. In candlelit rooms, mapmakers laid vellum across tables, dipping pens in iron gall ink. They patched the old world with new coastlines, gilded globes with names that may never have been earned. The silence of true records made room for the noise of false ones. A vellum chart from 1507 shows the Americas outlined, but its center left blank. Vast lands mapped by rumor, not by sight. The luxury of the object contrasts with the fragility of its truth. Polished calfskin, gilded lettering, precise compass roses, and a void in the middle where reality should have been. What did Vespucci really see? Which words were his, and which were inventions? Why did later voyages lean so heavily on these fragile papers, while earlier crossings, like the Norse at Vinland, faded into silence? One Italian scholar, holding a disputed letter, once said softly, "It is less a record than a ghost of a record." That is the tension. The objects, maps, globes, vellum charts, remain luxurious and whole. The truth inside them may never have existed at all. And so the question lingers. Was America named for a voyage that never happened? If you stayed with me through this page of the ledger, thank you. Objects outlast their stories, but your voice can help keep these fragments alive. Like the video, leave a comment and subscribe so the next journey into history's silences doesn't vanish before it's told. The Norse who reached Finland did not leave behind ledgers or ship's logs. They left sagas, stories carried in memory, told aloud, then finally written down centuries later on vellum sheets bound with clasps of silver and brass. In one saga, Leif Erikson sails west and finds forests heavy with timber, rivers full of salmon, land more fertile than Greenland. In another, his brother Thorvald explores farther and is struck by an arrow beneath his ribs, dying with the sentence still unfinished. "We have found good land, but we will have little peace." The line ends there. The story moves on. The manuscripts themselves are luxury objects, fragile but precious. Calfskin pages, smoothed and stretched. Letters traced by monks with quills dipped in ink darkened with soot. Covers bound in carved wood, clasped with metal to keep them from curling in damp. And yet inside these beautiful books, the stories are fragmentary, broken, sometimes contradictory. A voyage mentioned once is never mentioned again. A name appears, then disappears into silence. Why? Perhaps the sagas were always meant to be fluid, more poetry than record. Perhaps memory failed and gaps widened as they were retold across generations. Or perhaps something more deliberate happened. Erasures, omissions, choices about which journeys were worth preserving and which were not. In one vellum fragment, now browned with age, a sentence describing the Skrylings, the Norse term for the indigenous people they encountered, cuts off mid-word. The ink fades, the page tears, and what follows is gone forever. We are left with half a thought, a gesture toward an encounter that shaped history, but now survives only as an ellipsis. The silence is heavier when you hold the manuscripts themselves. In dim light, the letters gleam faintly. The silver clasps on one Icelandic volume catch the glow of the flame, but the gaps inside are unmoving. A saga promises answers, then closes its mouth. There is grief in this silence. For the Norse, Vinland was a place both hopeful and dangerous, fertile ground, violent clashes, a dream too distant to hold. The sagas remember this in fits and starts, but the collapse of their narrative feels like regret. A story that began with promise ends with erasure. One scholar, turning the brittle pages in Copenhagen, whispered almost to himself, "The silence is part of the story." He was right. The sagas are as famous for what they omit as for what they describe. Their beauty lies in vellum and gilded initials, but their weight lies in their collapse. Luxury survives, the bindings, the ink, the carved wooden covers. Memory does not. And so we are left with fragments, a half sentence about peace, a torn page where names should be, an object more complete than the words it carries. The sagas reached across the ocean, but their records refuse to. They remind us that discovery is not just about who arrived, but about who was allowed to be remembered. What else have we lost because a page stopped too soon? In the caverns of the Yucatan, divers found a girl. She had been there for more than 12,000 years, her skeleton resting in water so still it seemed like glass. Her bones were fragile, but nearly complete. The jaw, the skull, the long limbs collapsed gently into the limestone floor. They called her Naya, a name given long after her death, when she was pulled from darkness into the light of research. What startled the archaeologists was not simply her age, but her shape. Her skull was long, narrow, with features unlike the later populations we think of as Native American. Her face was smaller, her proportions different. Some scholars compared her to peoples of Africa, Australia, or the Pacific Islands. Others warned against rushing to conclusions. The silence is heavier than the data. The bones speak, but only in fragments. DNA analysis confirmed she was related to modern Native Americans, yet her features suggested something else, a variation, an early branch, a reminder that the first people of the Americas may not have looked like those Columbus later encountered. And Naya was not alone. Other remains from Brazil, from Chile, from Florida show the same pattern. Early skeletons with unexpected proportions. They seem to come from a world that no longer exists. a lineage that collapsed or blended into silence. The divers who first saw her described the heat above the water, the dust of the jungle outside, the sudden silence when they slipped below. The smell of iron lingered faintly in the air from their own tanks and tools, a modern intrusion into an ancient tomb. And then, through the beam of a light, the sight of bones, pale against stone, fragile as paper, yet older than almost any record we hold. One researcher, kneeling beside Naya's remains, said softly, "She is someone's daughter." That sentence carries weight. Too often bones become data, reduced to angles and measurements, statistics in charts. But here was a girl who had lived, walked, eaten, laughed, feared. She had slipped into the cave or fallen, perhaps chasing water, and never returned. Her family may have searched for her, calling into silence. The cave became her archive. Grief lingers in every discovery like this. We gain knowledge but lose the story. We can measure, we can date, we can compare, but we cannot ask her name or what she thought when she looked at the sky. The collapse of her lineage is another silence. Did her people fade through disease, conflict, or absorption into others? Did her features survive in descendants unnoticed? Or was she the last of a variation now erased from memory? The bones of others show the same questions. A child in Brazil with elongated skull. A woman in Florida with features that resist categorization. A man in Chile whose remains suggest connections to places across oceans. Each discovery brings wonder and discomfort. Archaeologists tread carefully. The bones belong not only to science but to communities alive today. Debates about origins can wound, reopening old scars of conquest and erasure. Some argue that to say they looked different risks being used as a weapon to deny indigenous people their rightful place as first inhabitants. Others argue the opposite, that acknowledging variation honors the depth and diversity of the past. The silence in the ledges offers no resolution. We have fragments of skeletons, not diaries. We have shapes, not voices. We have graves, but no epitaphs. And yet, holding the replica of Naya's skull in a lab, one scientist admitted quietly, "She makes us question what we thought we knew." That is the power of these bones. They unsettle the clean story of migration across the Bering Strait and remind us that human history is rarely a straight line. It is fragile, branching, collapsing, forgotten, remembered again only when bone or stone refuses to vanish. Luxury does not appear here in porcelain or silver. The luxury is in survival itself, that a skeleton could endure 12,000 years underwater, unbroken, waiting to be seen again. That is rarer than any artifact, more precious than gold. The girl in the cave, the woman in Florida, the child in Brazil. They are not anomalies. They are reminders. Reminders that discovery is not always about who arrived when, but about how many lives were lived, forgotten, and lost beneath silence. The grief is in what we cannot recover. The regret is in how often we force their remains into our debates instead of listening to their quiet presence. The collapse is in the gap between data and memory, a ledger half-written, stopping mid-sentence. When you picture Naya, imagine not just the bones, but the human she was. Imagine the sound of her voice long gone, carried away into the silence of her cavern, and then ask, how many other voices lie buried where no one has yet looked? In a darkened gallery in southern Germany, a globe rests in its case. It is made of copper sheets hammered thin, joined with seams of solder that still bear the smell of iron when polished. The surface is patched with inked outlines of Europe, Africa, Asia, coastlines drawn with confidence. But where the Americas should be, there is nothing. The mapmakers of the early 1500s were working with fragments. They had Columbus's notes, rumors from sailors, and letters of uncertain origin. They tried to fit the pieces into their charts, but what they lacked was always more striking than what they had. On this globe, the Western Hemisphere is blank, as if the world simply ended in silence beyond the Azores. The heat of the candlelight in the gallery catches the gilded lettering, letters that shine even as their content is uncertain. Dust lingers on the glass of the case, though attendants wipe it daily. To look closely is to see both ambition and ignorance, luxury materials framing incomplete knowledge. Globes like this were status symbols meant for wealthy courts. Monarchs would run their hands across the smooth copper and imagine empires stretching into the void. The blank spaces promised wealth, conquest, a chance to write history. But they also betray how little was actually known. The silence of missing records haunts these objects. Columbus wrote letters, but some are disputed. Vespucci's accounts were copied, forged, altered. The Norse sagas trailed into gaps. Polynesian traditions remained oral, unrecorded. What survived on parchment was patchwork, stitched into shapes of continents that did not exist. And yet, the globe itself survived. Its copper has outlasted the bones of the cartographer who made it. The seams remain tight where his own body has collapsed into dust. Imagine being in the workshop where it was created, the heat from the forge pressing close, the smell of molten metal in the air. Scribes hunched over vellum charts, tracing coastlines with steady hands, quills dipped in black. Outside, the sound of hammers striking iron, the ring echoing into silence when the day ended. The globe is not a mistake. It is a record of absence. It shows what the world thought it knew and what it chose to leave blank. In its emptiness, it carries more truth than a false map would have. The sight of bones in the Yucatan reminds us that lives were lived before the record began. The globe, with its missing hemisphere, reminds us that lives were forgotten as the record was written. Luxury and ignorance, together in one object. Copper sheets, gilded lettering, a blank expanse where millions already lived. When you stand before it, the questions rise on their own. Who decided what to include? Who decided what to omit? And how many voyages vanished into silence before someone had the chance to draw them? The water is murky in Guanabara Bay. Divers describe the heat on their backs as they suit up, the weight of the sun pressing through the humid air, the taste of salt already thick on their tongues. Then, beneath the surface, silence. Only the hiss of their own breath as they move through water darkened by silt. It was here, in the 1970s, that divers found the first fragments, clay shards lying across the seabed, their curves too regular to dismiss. They looked like Mediterranean amphorae, the long-necked jars used by Romans and Greeks to carry oil, wine, and grain. Over time, more appeared, dozens, then hundreds, enough to suggest not a single accident, but a scattering from a ship or ships. If true, it would mean ancient sailors had crossed the Atlantic, reaching Brazil long before Columbus. Yet no Roman or Greek logbook mentions such a voyage. No historian of the empire wrote of lands across the Western Sea. The ledgers are silent. Why are the objects here if the records are not? When the jars were lifted from the seabed, their surfaces carried the smell of iron from the tools used to scrape them clean. Barnacles still clung to their sides. Coral had begun to claim them, but the shapes were unmistakable. Narrow necks, rounded bodies, handles perfect for carrying on shoulders. They were not Portuguese barrels, not Spanish amphorae of later centuries. They looked older, and yet, context is fragile. Some scholars argue the jars could have been carried by later ships, dumped as ballast, or moved by currents from another wreck. Others point to the sheer number of fragments, hundreds, and ask, how could so many gather here by chance? On some dives, human bones were found nearby, fragile, unmoored, pale against the seabed. Were they from the same wreck, or another story altogether? No one can say with certainty. But the sight of bones beside jars of Mediterranean design unsettles the narrative. The debate has never closed. Were these amphorae truly Roman, proving a forgotten crossing? Or are they misplaced, their origin explained by more recent trade? The heat above the bay presses down, the dust of the city mingles with the sea breeze, and still the questions linger beneath. Who carried these jars? Why were their voyages not recorded? And if they did cross the ocean, why was that story erased from history? Objects do not lie, but they also do not explain. A jar can outlast its contents. A shard can outlast the ship that bore it. But without the words to anchor them, they float between possibility and doubt. If the amphorae truly belonged to Roman sailors, then the story of America's discovery must be rewritten. If they did not, then why do they sit here at all, pulled from a bay where no record places them? The silence of the seabed is deeper than any archive. On islands scattered across the Pacific, far from any continent, people built vessels that could cross entire oceans. Polynesian canoes were not accidents of drift. They were deliberate, engineered for journeys that spanned thousands of miles. Twin hulls lashed with cord, sails woven from pandanus leaves, masts that bent but did not break. These were ships of intention. Navigators learned to read more than maps. They studied the tilt of stars, the rise and fall of swells, the flight of birds at dawn, the color of water against the horizon. Knowledge was carried not in books, but in memory, recited, practiced, repeated in chants that acted as living ledgers. Archaeologists have shown how far they reached. Hawaii, New Zealand, Easter Island, nearly every habitable island in the Pacific. What remains unsettled is whether they went farther still, to the coasts of South America. The sweet potato, as we've seen, is one piece of the puzzle. Its roots speak of contact between Polynesia and the Andes. But there are other hints. South American chickens with Polynesian genetic markers. Canoes in California shaped in ways that echo Polynesian design. Words in Quechua that resemble Polynesian terms. Fragments scattered like stars across a night sky. Picture the moment of departure, the heat of the sand as a canoe is dragged to the water, the dust rising where people stand to push it forward. Silence before the chant begins, then the voices of crew and family merging as the vessel lifts onto the tide. The smell of iron is absent, no nails, no anchors. Rope and wood bind the vessel, every piece organic, and then the sea takes them. Did some of those voyages reach the Americas? European chroniclers were skeptical. They dismissed oral traditions as myth, the same way they once dismissed Norse sagas until the ruins at Land's Old Meadows were unearthed. But Polynesian knowledge was not myth. It was method, a discipline that combined astronomy, oceanography, biology. There is tension in the question. If they did reach the Americas, why are the records gone? Why no bones discovered in South America that can be tied securely to Polynesians? Why no coastal settlements that carry their distinct signature? Or are we simply not looking in the right places? The evidence waiting under layers of time and soil? A Polynesian elder, when asked by a European researcher about ancient voyages, answered softly, "The ocean remembers." That answer is both truth and mystery. The ocean does carry memory, in currents, in winds, in the drift of seeds and the spread of crops. But its archives are harder to read than paper, harder to trust than ink. Imagine a canoe making landfall on the South American coast. The crew exhausted, skin burnt by the sun, silence heavy after weeks of chanting. They would have seen unfamiliar forests, rivers, and perhaps people waiting on the shore. Did they leave gifts? Did they exchange crops, names, tools? Did they stay for a season or turn back with clippings of vines and stories of a land beyond the horizon? If they did, the record is gone. The canoes returned east. The crops remained. The words split into two languages that still whisper across oceans. Polynesian voyages remind us of a truth larger than discovery. Contact is not always conquest. It can be fragile, momentary, a meeting that leaves behind only a root, a word, or a memory. And yet, those fragments outlast empires. Sweet potatoes still grow. The chants survive in fragments. Canoes are still built on Pacific shores, their hulls lifted onto water in ceremonies that echo centuries of tradition. How many times was America reached before Columbus? How many voyages returned east, unrecorded, leaving only objects behind? The canoes carried no silver coins, no porcelain bowls, no gilded globes. Their luxury was knowledge itself, the skill to cross an ocean without maps, to read stars and swells like sentences. A ledger written not in ink but in movement, erased each time the sea closed behind them. In 1898, a farmer in Minnesota was clearing land when his plow struck stone. Pulling back the soil, he revealed a slab carved with runes, letters of an alphabet used by the Norse. The inscription described explorers from the 14th century, a journey inland, and deaths among their company. It ended abruptly, the last line heavy with loss. 10 men by the sea, dead after a journey of hardship. The stone, later called the Kensington Runestone, became an object of fierce debate. Was it genuine evidence that Norse explorers had pressed deep into North America, or a clever hoax carved by settlers in the 19th century? Linguists pointed to errors in the runes, words that matched modern Swedish rather than medieval Norse. Others argued the style was plausible, that weathering on the stone suggested true age. To hold it is to feel silence. The surface is rough, where soil pressed against it for centuries. The letters are cut deep but uneven. If it is authentic, it is a record of grief carved in urgency. Explorers carving into rock when paper and vellum were gone. If it is false, it is a record of longing. Descendants wanting proof of a past that had slipped away. Far to the east, in Rhode Island, another stone object raises questions. The Newport Tower, a circular structure of stone and mortar, rising from a park. Some believe it is colonial, built in the 17th century as a windmill. Others insist its style resembles medieval towers in Europe, suggesting it predates Columbus. Its arches are elegant, its proportions precise. But no document records its construction. No ledger explains its presence. The tower's stones carry their own silence. Dust settles in the mortar. Heat presses against its arches in summer, snow in winter. At night, the structure looms in quiet, offering no answers. Who built it? Why here? Why no mention in the records if it stood centuries before the colony? The emotional weight of these stones lies not in certainty, but in collapse. If the runestone is genuine, it records tragedy. 10 men dead, far from home, their memory left to erode in soil. If the tower predates Columbus, it records a forgotten presence, builders who left nothing else behind. And if both are false, they reveal something equally human. Our grief at the silence of history, our need to carve meaning where archives have failed. A scholar, after decades of study, touched the runestone once and said quietly, "If it is a hoax, it is the most honest hoax I've ever known." That is the power of disputed objects. They stir feeling, even when they withhold truth. They remind us that discovery is not always about what happened, but about what we wish had been remembered. The runes will not confirm themselves. The tower will not explain its stones. The silence remains, and in that silence we feel both regret and wonder. In a burial site on the Alaskan coast, archaeologists found a necklace unlike any other in the region. Strung together were 3 small beads of deep blue glass, smooth and luminous even after centuries underground. Their style matched beads made in the Roman world nearly 2,000 years ago. How did they arrive here? No Roman ship is known to have crossed the Pacific. No ledger describes trade with the far north of America. Yet the beads are real. The glass itself has been dated to between the 1st and 4th centuries CE. By the time they were buried, Rome itself was in decline. Imagine the heat of the fire that once melted sand into liquid, craftsmen shaping molten glass into small spheres, rolling them smooth. The smell of iron tools in the workshop. The silence of the kiln once the flames died down. These were luxury items, meant for adornment in lands where wealth demanded beauty as much as function. And yet, their journey carried them farther than any Roman merchant could have imagined. Perhaps they traveled through Central Asia, across Siberia, into networks of trade that stretched beyond maps. Perhaps they passed through many hands, each link in a chain of exchange now erased. When they finally reached Alaska, they were precious enough to be placed with the dead. The sight of bones alongside the beads sharpens the grief. A person once wore them, treasured them, and was buried with them as tokens of status or memory. Now, only the glass remains, outlasting the body it adorned. What do the beads mean? Were they evidence of contact across half the world, or simply proof that objects can wander farther than the people who make them? Did someone know their origin, or were they already stripped of story by the time they reached the Arctic shore? One archaeologist, holding a bead to the light, whispered, "It has seen more of the world than I ever will." That thought carries both wonder and regret. The beads outlasted empires. They survived the collapse of Rome, the erasure of records, the deaths of every hand that held them. But they cannot tell us who carried them east, or how they crossed the distance. Luxury is fragile in use, but resilient in survival. Glass breaks easily, yet here it lies, whole. The bones are gone to dust. The necklace remains. The mystery is not just in their presence, but in the silence that surrounds them. No chronicler wrote of this journey. No map records it. The beads are the only evidence, and so they sit in drawers and cases, protected, admired, but unanswered. Did they prove that America was touched by Rome, or only that trade routes stretched farther, carried objects like whispers into places never imagined? The silence is heavier than the glass itself. In his later writings, Columbus mentioned a story that had reached the Portuguese court. Off the coast of West Africa, sailors claimed they had seen great canoes, wide, seaworthy, loaded with goods, setting out toward the horizon. Not fishing boats, not short journeys, but voyages prepared for distance. Columbus was intrigued enough to investigate. On his third voyage, he sailed south along Africa before turning west, following the winds. What he found was South America. Were those African canoes headed there first? The Atlantic does not resist such a crossing. Trade winds blow steady westward, the same winds later used by every European empire. The distance between Senegal and Brazil is less than 3,000 kilometers. With provisions and sails, the journey is possible, but the ledgers are empty. No African record describes these voyages. No American site has yielded an artifact that proves them. Silence closes over the rumor, leaving only Columbus's note and the question of why it was remembered at all. The sensory weight of the rumor lingers. Heat presses on the African coast as men load supplies. Dust rises as paddles are dragged to water. The silence after departure is heavy. Only the creak of wood and the rustle of palm sails breaking it. The smell of iron lingers faintly from tools left behind, and then nothing. Only ocean, only horizon. If the canoes reached America, what did they leave? Were goods exchanged? Were crops traded? Were stories spoken between strangers on the shore? Or did storms pull them under before they could arrive? Centuries later, the colossal Olmec heads of Mexico stirred new speculation. Their carved features reminded some early scholars of Africa. Could contact have left an imprint in stone? Others argue no. The heads reflect indigenous artistry, strength, and identity. The debate itself reveals our hunger for connection where records are absent. Objects of fragile luxury appear in these stories like ghosts. A carved head with no inscription, a rumor preserved in a royal letter, a canoe imagined only in its absence. They are pieces of a puzzle that may never resolve. A Portuguese chronicler, reflecting on the rumor, once wrote, "If they reached new land, the land has kept their secret." That line carries grief. If African sailors did cross, their names are gone. Their bones may lie beneath foreign soil or beneath the waves, unseen. Their stories collapsed before they could be written. But the possibility still unsettles the ledger. If canoes could leave Africa and vanish into silence, how many other departures have we forgotten? What else has the ocean erased? In a storeroom far from the sea, porcelain shards rest in trays lined with felt. Their glaze still gleams faintly blue, centuries after the vessels themselves shattered. They were meant for banquets and courts, carried across oceans as fragile luxuries, yet here they lie in fragments. Most can be traced to the Manila galleons, Spanish ships that, after 1565, ferried Chinese porcelain to Mexico and Peru. But a few pieces trouble the timeline. They appear in layers of soil where Spanish trade should not yet exist. The heat of the excavation lingers in the memory of those who found them. Dust clung to their hands as they brushed the shards from earth that had kept them hidden for centuries. In the silence of the trench, each fragment seemed to carry a question heavier than its weight. How did porcelain, made in Jingdezhen, kilns thousands of miles away, come to rest in American soil so early? Was it through later ships, wreckage misdated, or could the contact have come sooner, erased from the record? Porcelain was not the only object that unsettled the ledges. Across Europe, mapmakers struggled to keep pace with discoveries, patching globes and vellum charts with half-remembered coastlines. One globe, hammered from copper sheets and polished until it shone, shows Europe, Africa, and Asia traced in certainty. But the Americas are sketched awkwardly, their outlines broken, their centers blank. Dust gathers on its surface now, though attendants polish it daily. Its beauty endures, its ignorance preserved. The silence is sharp when you stand before such a globe. The smell of iron still clings faintly to the tools that made it. Compasses, dividers, ink pots stained with gall. To a king, it was luxury, an ornament for a courtly chamber. To us, it is confession, an admission that maps can lie as easily as they tell truth. Luxury objects often outlast the people who carried them. A porcelain cup survives when the sailor who handled it has turned to bone. A copper globe remains intact, while the cartographer's name fades to dust. Bones themselves outlast paper, but even they collapse into silence when taken from their context. In caves, under forests, beneath seabeds, skeletons are found with features that challenge the neat stories written in ledgers. Their silence is as powerful as any map's blank space. So we are left with fragments, porcelain that should not exist where it is found, globes gilded with names that may not have been earned, bones that resist the categories we impose. Each fragment is real. Each fragment is silent. Why do we preserve the objects and lose the stories? Why is it easier to gild a globe than to remember a voyage that carried no survivors? Why do fragments whisper across centuries, while ledgers vanish in a single file? One mapmaker, asked why he left entire oceans blank, is said to have replied, "Because the sea keeps its own counsel." His words echo in every fragment. The sea remembers in shards, in wreckage, in porcelain that glitters in a trench, in maps patched with names that may not belong. There is grief in this, grief that we may never know who carried these cups, who drank from them last, who traced coastlines with quills in rooms lit by candlelight while ships sank far away. There is regret in every blank page where an earlier voyage might have been recorded. And there is collapse in the way our story of discovery narrows to a few names, a few dates, while fragments scattered across the world whisper otherwise. Luxury survives. Copper globes, gilded initials, porcelain shards. Truth does not always survive with them. The shards remain in drawers. The maps remain under glass, and the silence between them grows heavier each year we fail to ask, what else have we already found and already forgotten? Across this journey, we have walked through a museum of fragments, a silver coin found in Maine, authentic yet orphan, Roman amphorae resting in Brazil's waters, their cargo long gone, their voyage unrecorded, a terracotta head placed in a grave in Mexico, its face resembling lands across the sea, sweet potatoes that carried both Polynesian and Quechua names, roots that whispered of contact no ledger described, porcelain shards gleaming blue in soil where no galleon should yet have been, globes patched with coastlines, their centers left blank, their gilded letters masking ignorance, the heat of workshops, the dust of excavations, the silence of caves, the smell of iron from tools and anchors, the sight of bones that do not fit the story. Each sense has reminded us that history is not only written in ledgers, but carried in objects that endure when words collapse. And yet, grief lingers. We grieve for the voyages erased, for the people whose names were lost, for the collapse of records that could have told us more. We regret how often fragments outlast their context, how often luxury survives while memory does not. These objects will not resolve the question of who discovered America first, but perhaps that is the wrong question. The coin, the amphora, the head, the bead, the map, the shard. They ask something different. How many times was America discovered, and why were so many of those discoveries erased from the ledger? One archaeologist, holding a disputed artifact, said softly, "Objects remember what archives forget. That may be the truest answer we have. The ledger of discovery is still open. Every coin in soil, every shard in a drawer, every carving in stone is another line, waiting to be read. If you've stayed with me through this page of the ledger, thank you. Objects outlast their stories, but your voice can help keep them alive. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe, so the next fragment we uncover does not vanish into silence. And if this mystery has stayed with you, you'll want to join me for the next episode, The Hidden Truth That Nearly Destroyed America. It is not about voyages, but about a secret closer to home, a truth buried in plain sight, one that brought the United States closer to collapse than most of us were ever taught. That story begins not with an artifact, but with a letter that was never meant to be found. The ledger turns again,